Iraq entered 2026 with a stable but fragile economy. It's highly dependent on oil revenues, its politics completely divided, and the presence of Iran-backed militias make it very hard to govern efficiently. The war in Iran has pushed the delicate balance to the brink. Olly Barrett was in the Kurdistan region of Iraq shortly after the war started. So that's a northern part of the country that's been attacked by the Tehran-backed militia called the Popular Mobilization Forces. The Kurdistan region is also home to the Al-Hira airbase used by US and coalition forces, making it a target for Iran's retaliatory attacks. Olly joins us for the CNA Correspondent podcast. Olly, good to have you on. So, early days of the war, people were trying to leave the region. You took out a map, basically, looked at it and said, hey, let's go to Kurdistan. Let's go see what's happening in Erbil. I mean, what were you hoping to find?
Well, Arnold, that's exactly right. That's basically exactly what we did. And one of the reasons we wanted to go to Erbil was that we knew that Iraq was becoming very quickly a really interesting part of the story for many of the reasons that you mentioned. Also, we knew that it would potentially give us the ability to use Erbil as a launching off point to try and get towards the border with Iran at some point. It's not too far from Erbil, a couple of hours away, 2 or 3 hours away. And crucially, I knew I could get there, and I'd been there many times before. So I had lots of contacts there, fixers, producers, people who are now in government, people who are in the military. So there was a sort of support network there as well to be able to feel that we were safe, for one, but also to feel that we would be able to do some good reporting on the ground.
But how did you get in, Olly? I mean, airlines basically cancelled all flights, and they remain cancelled, most of them anyway, to this day.
To Iraq, all of them have been cancelled. The airspace has basically been shut since the war broke out, and they keep extending that for 72-hour periods, and we're still in that phase at the moment. There are no flights going in and out of Erbil International Airport in the north, or indeed Baghdad Airport in the south. And so I had to fly to Istanbul in Turkey, and then from Istanbul down to Sirnak in the south, from where it's about an hour's drive to the Ibrahim Khalil border crossing into Iraq. That was pretty straightforward on the way in, and then it's a 3.5-4 hour drive down to Erbil. Now, coming back out was a slightly different matter, because you can imagine there are quite a lot of people trying to make that journey for various different reasons. And so that was the same drive towards the border, but we were warned that some people were getting stuck at Ibrahim Khalil for up to 18 hours trying to get back out into Turkey. That didn't take it quite as long for us. We left at midnight local time in Erbil, got to the border 3 a.m, something like that. We got through the border about 6:30 a.m, so it wasn't too bad. 3.5 hours to get through. All sorts of checks, as you can imagine. Lots of people there, very, very busy. I had a driver who knew that my flight wasn't till 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so we actually parked up and had a nap in his car. At which point, Arnold, I found that there was some, let's say, some loading and unloading of cigarettes going on. So I think he had a bit of a side hustle going on.
I see. Okay.
But we were then able to get to Sirnak Airport in time for a flight back to Istanbul, back to London.
Wonderful. Good that you were safe, but I guess we all have to make a living as well, as far as your driver is concerned. So, Olly, you were there. You spoke to, I imagine, many people who are right now in the region. I mean, what did they tell you? I mean, what's top of mind for them? I imagine the war, must be one of the main talking points for them.
Very much so, and it has to be, partly because in Erbil, but across the Kurdistan region, there are daily, and I mean daily, missile, rocket and drone attacks. There hasn't been a day that the conflict has been happening so far that there have not been attacks on the Kurdistan region. And so, for one thing, you hear and see these drones flying across the sky, and you hear and see explosions normally as they are intercepted often by American and British forces who are based in Erbil at the air base, the coalition forces base there. So there's the safety issue. People have died, people have been hurt, property has been damaged, even if a lot of these projectiles are being intercepted in some way. And then, of course, you won't be surprised to hear that it's all about the economy. and the economy in the north has been in used the word earlier, fragile state for some time. Oil revenues are crucial, but there are disputes with the federal government in Baghdad. People in the north really feel that they've been squeezed economically for a long, long time, and this conflict is just making things worse. And so it's really for many people about that day-to-day struggle to try and get by.
You were at a border town as well, where the crossing was closed, but was reopening as you arrived there. Can you tell us what people were saying? I mean, this would be where I imagine, many Iranians would be coming across either to maybe get away from the war or perhaps to do what they do on a daily basis in terms of trading and making a living. I think the crossing is called the Haji Omaran crossing. I mean, what did you hear?
Yeah, up in the mountains, very, very cold. On the day that we were there, it was also very, very wet. It is beautiful up there. But as we were there, as you say, for CNA, the border crossing was reopening for the first time since the conflict began. And so you were starting to see movement of freight and people into Iraq. But I think it's worth saying this was not a flood of people. You are not seeing a sort of mass exodus from Iran. And there are various reasons for that, and that feeds into the fact that many people are very, very cautious to speak to you, certainly on camera. We did manage to get one chap who did speak to us into the camera, and he said he was coming over for work. He would be there for a month or so, and then he would go home. He said that he thought things were sort of okay on his side of the border in Iran, but that he didn't know what was going on in Tehran necessarily. He said that prices were definitely going up, but he was measured in his response. And other people, as I say, would speak to you off camera. They are cautious because they don't want to be, obviously, seen on camera criticising the government, criticising the regime, criticising conditions back at home, because they fear reprisals for themselves and they fear reprisals for their families who are still in the country. So that was the way people were talking. It was quite measured. And as I say, there's no mass exodus because, again, people don't want to be caught being seen to have fled the country and therefore see reprisals for their family members. But what a lot of people were saying was that it was really important for that border crossing to be reopened. And what we did also speak to was Kurdish, Iraqi Kurdish people who were going into Iran and coming back out again, and they told a slightly different story about conditions over the border and how difficult things were beginning to get. And then we also spoke to some market traders in the town there, and they were telling us really that life had become, from a business perspective, very, very difficult indeed.
In the past 2 weeks, due to the Iranian-American war, the situation has become fragile. People were scared that the war would expand and reach the whole region. The war has had an impact on our work in general because this is a border town and there is a border gate where many people work. It has affected people and the market has slowed down.
And that was what a lot of people were saying, really. They were worried about their livelihoods as much as anything, but also talking about, obviously, the safety issues too.
So, Olly, did you get a sense that the Kurds, feel a bit more vulnerable because of this war? We know, the Kurds came up when Trump was calling for ordinary Iranians to rise up against the regime. That plan was eventually dropped. I mean, give us an idea why the Kurds were mentioned, first of all, and not the other groups.
Well, the one thing to say about the Kurds is you have to be really careful talking about them as one group, because inside this region of the Iraqi Kurdistan area, you have all sorts of political groups and factions. They all have their own forces, these peshmerga groups, and then of course you have Kurdish groups in Syria, in Turkey, in Iran itself. And that's one of the reasons that President Trump and people in the US administration and Israeli officials started to talk about the Kurds, is because there are Iranian Kurds currently based inside Iraqi territory. And it's those forces, those Peshmerga groups, that the Americans seem to think might launch military operations inside Iran and might destabilize the regime and might be the kind of thing that could see regime change as a result in Iran. Now, some of those Iranian Kurdish groups which are currently housed inside Iraqi territory have said, look, when the time is right, we are ready. They also say, if we're going to do something of that nature, we need to know that the Americans are behind us and crucially above us in the air, that we have, for example, air support for all of this. What we don't want is to go in there and essentially be left to our own devices and if things don't go well, be in a really, really difficult situation. They don't want it all to be left to them. And the other thing to say is that in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, the mainstream politicians there who run the government in the KRG, the Kurdistan region, they have said very clearly they do not want their region being used as a launching pad for military operations into other countries. Iraq and indeed the Kurdistan region are technically allies of Iran. They don't want to be seen to be being used in that way. So it seems that that plan has been backed away from. And it is something, though, that people talk about a lot. And I spoke to a grocer who talked exactly about this as he was handing out his fruit and veg to his customers, talking about the oppression that Kurds have felt for so long and therefore the caution that many of them have about exactly this type of thing.
For many years, Kurds have been oppressed and displaced. There is almost no country you can go to where there are no Kurds, and it is all because of war, oppression and displacement, the destruction of homes. Of course, the war has an impact. People are scared of war and they buy fewer things. Of course, it has an impact.
So, Olly, I want to go back to the peshmerga that you were talking about a little bit earlier. You spoke to one of them, and just to remind everyone, this is the military arm of the Kurds, and widely seen, as I understand it, to be one of the most effective anti-ISIS forces that were allied with the Americans between 2014 and 2017. I also hear that some historians say they have little to show for their efforts. You spoke to one. What's his story?
Yeah, his story is a story you hear quite a lot in the region. He's now a taxi driver, but was a peshmerga. And that is something that is seen a lot across the region. You have people who were fighters who have since retired or have moved into the general economy. But they always say, once a peshmerga, always a peshmerga. And this is something that we saw a lot in the fight against ISIS that you mentioned, which is that retired peshmerga turned up for duty. They went to see their former military commanders and they said, look, we're here for the fight, we're ready to go. And the peshmerga forces in the region were absolutely crucial in that fight against ISIS. But you're also quite right to say that many of them feel they've been slightly hung out to dry afterwards. And this is something you hear from the Kurds. And that takes us back to that question about military operations in Iran as well. They feel over decades, if not hundreds of years, they have been asked to fight, asked to put their lives on the line, and then being hung out to dry by their allies. But yes, I spoke to Sahad, who's, as I say, now a taxi driver.
There are no shortages yet, thanks to God. But the war has had an impact and prices have increased. We would like the war to stop. War has no benefit for anyone. We want it to be stopped.
So you hear there from a former military man himself, among those people who just want the war to end. Okay,
so Olly, a really fragile situation, as we discussed, but also a very complicated situation, which brings me to Turkey. I want to know what role Turkey plays. I mean, the Kurdistan region we know is linked closely to Turkey because of geography. There's a lot of trade going on as well. You talked about border town trade. And also energy, some oil, from Iraq is going through Turkey because the Strait of Hormuz is now closed. But this, also appears to be a very complicated relationship. Ankara doesn't seem to trust Kurds in general, despite the PKK in Turkey being a completely separate group. So I'm just wondering, how is this all coming together in the context of this war on Iran?
It's an incredibly complex relationship. We could do a whole podcast on it. We could do a series of podcasts on it and never quite get to the bottom of it. At the moment, relations between the Kurdistan Regional Government in northern Iraq and the Turkish government seem to be in a pretty good place. You mentioned the oil pipeline. That is absolutely crucial to the region, but also to Iraq, to try and get as much oil to international markets as possible. So there is that pipeline near to Kirkuk, which sends oil through Kurdistan and into Ceyhan in Turkey. So that is part of the questioning, part of the relationship, part of the calculation here. Certainly there are, in the region that I came into from Iraq to get back to the UK and vice versa in the other direction, that is a Kurdish region of Turkey, and certainly the Kurds there for a long time have felt they've been treated as second-class citizens in a way. You mentioned the PKK. We've had over years the Turkish government effectively feeling that there was a terrorist insurrection underway in the south of the country in the Kurdish regions. It's fiendishly complex. At the moment, as I say, the KRG seem to be on relatively good terms with Ankara. I think they all realise that at the moment they can cooperate, they can get along, they can try and do business, they can try and help their citizens on either side of the Turkey-Iran border as much as possible. But it's going to be a complex relationship for some time to come in the future, whether they're in a relatively good position at the moment in terms of relations or not.
Before I let you go, I just want to get a sense. I mean, we've been talking quite a bit about, I suppose, the Kurdish perspective, the KRG. I'm wondering as a whole about how the Iraqi government in Baghdad feels about the situation right now, what position it's taking vis-a-vis the war, what the US is doing, and Iran's response as well.
It is very, very difficult for the Iraqi government because, for one, as I say, they are an ally of Tehran. You also have these really strong Iranian influences inside Iraq. You mentioned the Iran-backed militia groups who have been attacking targets in Kurdistan. They have been attacking coalition bases there. They have been attacking Kurdish peshmerga forces in the region as well. So you have attacks on Iraq coming from within Iraq. And in the north, the Kurds say to Baghdad, look, you have to get these militia groups in order. They are aligned with you. They are in some ways funded by you. We need you to crack down on them. You have the Americans attacking PMF bases, for example. The Israelis carrying out strikes on Iran-backed militia groups in Iraq. When that happens, the Iraqis say to the Americans and the Israelis, this is a breach of our sovereignty. And so this is one of the reasons we went to Iraq in the first place, is because it is in a way becoming a conflict almost of its own. And I think what a lot of people in Baghdad and elsewhere in the country and in the northern Kurdistan really, really fear is that even if you get to a moment where the Americans and the Israelis feel that victory's been achieved and they end their military operations, that it's quite possible that a simmering conflict remains inside the borders of Iraq.
Olly, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Olly Barrett was in the Kurdistan region of Iraq for CNA. I'm Arnold Gay. Thank you very much for listening as well. This CNA Correspondent podcast was brought to you by Clara Ong, Tiffany Ang, Ned Fetal-Vero, and Craig Dean.